But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
And the aliens would mind meld and give them the technology. They're bad aliens.
So
are you surprised the Nazis were influenced by demons?
No, if demons are real, I would definitely think they'd be on the side of the Nazis.
Yeah.
McDonald's is connected to the Clintons. They chop up the bodies and put them into the sausage and hamburgers. People are being cannibalized. Look it up.
And I'm watching CNN talk about this as violent white nationalist protests. We have done everything in our power to keep this peaceful, you know?
It's Pepe's become kind of a symbol.
Welcome to Yeah Nah Pasaran, a show about fascism and its gravediggers. I'm Cam Smith.
I'm Andy Fleming.
And joining us this week from Biden's America, it's Jason Wilson. How are you, Jason?
I'm very well, gentlemen. Nice to be here.
Speaking on behalf of yourself or on behalf of an organisation?
Just myself, as always.
Jason, there's been a lot going on. We last spoke to you in May.
Oh, wow. It's been that long? Yeah, okay. Yeah, there's been a lot going on.
Since then, one thing that happened was the 5-year anniversary of Charlottesville, which you were at. I was wondering what your reflections were upon Charlottesville 5 years later.
They were fairly somewhat pessimistic, I got to say, just in the sense that the rhetoric and the kind of open, far-right organizing that was so shocking to mainstream opinion when millions of people first understood what was going on around that time. The other thing that's been going on, or one of the other things that's been going on, are several trials in relation to January 6th, including that of Oath Keepers founder Stuart Rhodes. You know, there's a very real sense in which none of the sort of contentious and or violent far-right street protests that, you know, Charlottesville was a kind of early example of. That none of that really stopped after Charlottesville. Maybe it was different groups. Maybe it was groups that were careful not to very explicitly disavow fascism or Nazism or whatever. Groups like the Proud Boys, groups like Patriot Prayer here in Portland. That stuff just kept rolling on. And then in 2021, at the Capitol, you know, it happened there. And that was completely unsurprising, really, to anyone who had been taking notice of what was going on. And in fact, those guys had done it in a number of state houses in the weeks leading up to that event. And yeah, I mean, people were outraged when Charlottesville happened, but it just didn't seem to really kind of change that trajectory, at least in the sense of elected officials, law enforcement agencies didn't really recognize at the time that Charlottesville happened that this was a movement, you know, a set of conditions that wasn't just going to go away because people were outraged. From the mayor of Portland to state governors to national Democrats, like no one really, let alone Republicans, no one really drew any lines in the sand after Charlottesville. And that's apart from the murder of Heather Heyer and, you know, the many other people who were badly hurt, some of them that day. And apart from the spectacle of that happening in an American city, the other tragedy was that really Charlottesville didn't really kind of lead to any sort of consistent response from those with the power to do something. Didn't lead to any sense of urgency from anyone with the power to do anything. And it might seem like all of that is kind of, it's less prominent now, but it seems to me that there's still in-person street protests and stuff happening. There are people who are harassing doctors, you know, in hospitals and libraries because of far-right disinformation, telling them that all kinds of horrible things are going on in these places. Like, I guess if we talked in May, that was just before 31 members of Patriot Front got arrested in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, right, where they were going to try to disrupt a pride event there. And people can't seem to see either the continuities between the people who are carrying out transphobic and homophobic harassment campaigns or showing up at pride events, showing up at libraries, you know, shutting things down. They can't see the continuities between that and Charlottesville. They can't see that there's actually a pretty big overlap in who's doing that stuff between people doing that stuff now and what happened in Charlottesville. I mean, I know there's one particular actor in Idaho who runs a website and has this kind of national network of people who, you know, he can activate and, you know, libs of TikTok have taken up his cause from now and again. And this guy was literally at Charlottesville. He marched at Charlottesville. So those continuities have not been noted, or certainly not acted on, or there's been no kind of consistent, effective response to any of that. And it seems to me that when the next time that these folks have the cover afforded by their party having state power at the federal level, controlling the federal government, they're gonna redouble all of those efforts. And probably, the Department of Justice is going to be in different hands, and they're not going to pursue that stuff in the same kind of way. So they were my reflections, really, that Charlottesville, unfortunately, Charlottesville could have been really an inflection point, and 5 years later, it would have been great if we were able to say, and this is not to at all cast any kind of doubt on the bravery of the people who showed up to counter-protest that, and is not to say that they didn't do what they could, but it could have been an inflection point in terms of the way in which this country deals with the far right and deals with this violent, authoritarian, hateful movement that's still around. But yeah, it wasn't that, and it's kind of like it wasn't like it was this. There was some kind of large scale effort that failed, right? Like people just by and large, just didn't do much. Certainly not people with power.
Jason, it was only a little after the 5th anniversary, I think, at the beginning of September or thereabouts, that Joe Biden made an observation that Trumpism was a form of semi-fascism. Do you think this is accurate, and do you think this represents the kind of recognition on the part of the government as to the seriousness of the threat posed to American democracy by these sorts of ideas and movements?
I will say that I was really happy to hear him say that, because I think that there has been a reluctance on the part of the Democrats, which are the one unambiguously non-fascist party of government in the United States. Whatever we might want to say about the way in which bipartisan policy around the border and stuff like that has contributed to this mess. I think for electoral reasons, previously Democrats have been reluctant to call out what's going on in the Republican Party in that way, and I was happy to hear him say that. Of course, I'm conscious that he's trying to fight a midterm election, but even so, I think that in recent history, Democrats have been far more focused on trying to sort of not offend sort of moderate or not scare moderate Republicans who they might be able to carve off into an electoral coalition, by drawing these kinds of lines. And, for whatever it's worth, I'm pretty glad that he said that, because I don't know what you guys think specifically of semi-fascist as a, whether that's perhaps pulling his punches a little, or what you think about it as a term. But I think that I think it was an effective speech. Another phrase he used in that speech was MAGA Republicans. I'm not talking about all Republicans, just these MAGA Republicans kind of thing. I suppose some people might have seen that as equivocation as well, and maybe it is, but the one thing it did was got all of these kind of like pro-Trump folks on social to like identify themselves as MAGA Republicans, to identify themselves as the people Biden was talking about, and then thus to invite people, I guess, to consider whether they really wanted to be, seen as anything like these folks. I mean, I'm curious, as to how it looked from the outside. Like, it seems to me like it's just words, right? It's just rhetoric, but it's rhetoric that is unambiguously saying these people are a problem for democracy, and we need to address that. Yes, it's in the lead up to a midterm election, but him wanting to do his job and to limit the electoral prospects of far right candidates is, I mean, if it works, I guess I won't complain about that. But I'm curious about how it looked from Australia.
I was struck by the fact that the F word had been employed. I would consider Trumpism to be, I'd describe it as a proto-fascist movement. It's a form of fascism that's undergoing development. I think it drew a line, or at least that seemed to be Biden's intent, and to place some pressure on so-called moderates within the Republicans. I don't know if it would have been or was very successful. So, but I guess that will be borne out by the election results. I think of the fact that, or what was the response to Meloni's triumph in Italy, and the commentary by many self-described conservatives, which proclaimed, many of them, they could see nothing at issue with the program or the politics of the brothers in Italy, and therefore it would be wrong to describe it as fascist because it actually converges with their own so-called conservative view of the world. So I think there's a kind of, on the whole, there's a kind of convergence taking place. And I think, I'm not sure that, I mean, when I think of Biden as a person, I think of an elderly, slightly doddering figure who represents a kind of weakened political liberalism that is subject to bullying. And I think in terms of politics as performance, that seems to be what is happening. And I think Trump excels at that sort of thing, as do other demagogues. They delight in ridiculing these figures, recasting their commitment to procedural democracy as a form of weakness and taking advantage of it. In terms of US politics, I think it seems to be the main cleavage is between those who advocate for reproductive freedom and those who oppose it. And it seems to be the case that a majority of US citizens and presumably voters favour reproductive freedom. And maybe that's a more fruitful way of combating these kinds of reactionary tendencies. That's my kind of hot take. I don't know, what do you think?
No, it could be. I mean, and maybe from my point of view in doing the kind of work I do in the States, like maybe I was excessively grateful just to get the sense that they do actually get it, right? That the Democrats do actually understand that there's something going on. Because certainly I've doubted that at times, that they really understood how serious this problem was. I mean, the other thing about the national leadership of the Democratic Party, I think the average age of a United States senator is well into the 70s. And this isn't ageism, but these folks have been around for a long time. Someone like Dianne Feinstein, who's, I think, 90. They've been doing politics for Nancy Pelosi, I believe. She's 80. Don't take my word for that, but she's getting up there. And they've been doing politics for a long time during a period of, I would say, unusual institutional stability. Let's put it that way. It's not that there was total social peace or, political comity during that period, but a lot of institutions more or less functioned in the way that liberals and Democrats kind of said that they did, for better or worse. And I'm just not sure if you can do that for 30 or 40 years like Joe Biden has. He's been there since the Watergate election, I think. So almost 50 years. I don't know if you can just flick a switch when you've been doing something for that long and just create an effective emergency response to an insurgent, anti-democratic movement, which is millions of people strong at this point. So, and there were times when I just thought that those people are kind of so remote from the stuff I'm seeing every day, from just having to deal with everyday life in the United States, because a lot of them are also extremely wealthy people. I just didn't think they got it. And maybe Biden's speech, as I was saying, excessively grateful for, because I just thought, well, at least he's talking about it. But you're right. I mean, is it a politically salient message compared to the fact that the Supreme Court reversed itself on women's rights to abortion? Maybe not. But, I think that, speaking of abortion, I guess, the biggest thing that's happening, I think, currently on the far right in the United States is this kind of transphobic and ultimately homophobic as well campaign against hospitals that carry out gender-affirming care, that offer gender-affirming care to kids who are figuring out stuff with respect to their gender. They're attacking drag shows, which have been going on unremarked on, for quite a long time. This is not a new development, right? But it's being treated like some kind of emergency, which is connected in conspiracy theory to a like nationwide network of supposed pedophiles. So attacks on hospitals on libraries. So getting books banned about critical race theory and about anything that touches on the subject of, transgender kind of issues, all put together with this idea of that there are groomers, people sexually grooming minors in these very public ways all across the country. That's the biggest thing that's happening. And the connection with reproductive rights here is that people are showing themselves to be extremely prepared on the basis of a bunch of nonsense to harass doctors and nurses, to physically show up at public facilities like hospitals and schools and libraries, to physically confront the people who they believe are preying on children. I mean, when this abortion stuff really starts to heat up, and some states have completely shut it down and others are continuing to provide for abortions to happen, and maybe, people start crossing state lines in order to have an abortion. I mean, this is a movement that it's not, I don't think it's going to have a problem shifting gears from showing up at libraries and picking fights to showing up at abortion clinics and picking fights. And then suddenly, and every election showing up at county clerk's offices or wherever people are counting votes to confront people there. I mean, this is like January 6th was obviously extremely troubling to these politicians because they personally experienced it. But when it comes down to it, right, it was an attack on a public building. And similar kinds of things are happening weekly across the country. Similar kinds of people showing a similar preparedness to go to public places in order to confront their imagined enemies. I don't like words like insurgency because of their connection with, I suppose, the counterinsurgency doctrines that crept up during the war on terror and the invasion of Iraq. I don't. That word's unfortunately contaminated now, but there's something like that in the beginning stages, right? Like in this kind of movement, in what it's doing. Those of us who sort of work in this sector, I know that there's this term for a certain strain of far right thinking, which is anti-government. That the organization I work for uses and others use, and law enforcement has also used in the past. This idea of anti-government groups is a specific strain of far right ideology. It feels slightly quaint at this point to say that that's just one among many strands of militancy on the far right, right? Because it's like obviously not all hospitals are run by the government, literally run by the government here. Not many of them are at all, but they're public facilities, right? The sort of across the far right, and the far right is now much, much larger than it was, in terms of as a movement. Across the far right, there is this obvious preparedness to attack public spaces, to attack the idea of a shared public space, to certainly a complete intolerance for different values to their own, to the extent that the people who hold those values are defined as a danger. I mean, if you really think that, I don't know, all Democrats are groomers, if you really think that, well then how can you live in a society with those people, right? Like that's got to be intolerable, right? Like if you think that half the country are interested or apologizing for organized child abuse, I mean, how can you live in the same country with those people? And that's where the idea that it's the out group. I'm sure you guys have read J.M. Berger's stuff. Like, I don't know what you think of it, but his sort of definition of extremism as an in-group whose identity is partly built on their sort of hatred for an out group and the belief that it's just not possible to share a society with that out group. I mean, you're on your way to a really, really super dark place, right? If you kind of combine that with state power.
I did see a tweet from a MAGA Republican, I think Senate candidate earlier in the week, which was essentially, I'm sure progressives have good intentions, brackets, but they don't ever. But everything they do is bringing us towards a CCP government. And it's like, even like the beginning was, an attempt to reach across the aisle that was immediately just discarded.
Right. Well, and that's the other part of this, right? I mean, I saw a video with Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I guess it was an event, the Save America rally, I think it was called, happened yesterday, I think, or perhaps it was today. Anyway, as we're recording this, I saw in this video that she said, and no way was she saying this for the first time, but it's a reminder, like, basically telling the person interviewing her that Democrats want to kill Republicans, like that's what they're all about. Like they're going to kill us all. So that the other part, right? Like these people are evil. Like how can we live in the same society? And they want to kill all of us, right? Like it's just setting up a mindset that doesn't need to be an electoral majority in order to destroy democracy, right? I mean, you don't need that many people to be of that mind in order to just have any kind of liberal democracy totally break down. And I don't think enough people are making the connections, like that, to go back to Charlottesville, like all along, this has been the same mutating movement. I mean, some people drop off, some new people get picked up. Maybe it's certainly expanded. There are more and more people who are persuaded by these sorts of ideas. At least, if we consider that a lot of this stuff is now becoming Republican Party policy effectively. So yeah, I think the leadership on if liberal democracy is going to survive in the United States, someone's going to need to want it to, and they're going to need to address it very energetically, right? And I'm not seeing enough energy from the people who have the power to actually kind of set policy and set directions and draw meaningful lines, and look, the thing is that I think that the reality is that this is still, you need to still take it seriously, like I just said, but this is a minority of Americans. It's maybe, the number 20, 25% comes up in a lot of different contexts as the people who believe the worst stuff, support the worst politicians unflaggingly. Like that was about the size of the hardcore Trump base. You'll find that number is also the number of people who, well, maybe not will say yes to Q, but, will say yes to a whole bunch of authoritarian far-right ideas. And I think that cohort is disproportionately an older one. But to be that as it may, I mean, this stuff will always come up, right? It just seems like, certainly in modern history, it seems like these movements crop up from time to time. But the fact that it's going to be really hard for them to impose their will on such a big and diverse kind of nation, maybe that just means even more fractures and divisions will be necessary down the line. I'm not sure, but I think it's probably the case that authoritarians, fascists, whatever, are always like a minority, right? And they always kind of exhaust themselves because a lot of the time they just can't govern rationally. But I don't know. I mean, they can do a lot of damage on the way, right? The thing is that Trump is almost beside the point at the moment, right? I think that the Republican Party has finally figured out how to do the thing that they wanted to do from the start, which was kind of shut down Trump or control him. And what they're going to do, I think, is run Ron DeSantis, who is able to deliver a kind of political performance that is appealing to the Trump coalition, but he doesn't come with the baggage that Trump does. I mean, his election was kind of, in some ways, it should never have been that close, of course, ever. It should never have been that close. But his first election was kind of a fluke, and then the midterms in 2018 were a disaster, and then he lost in 2020. Like, I'm not concerned about him winning another election. And I kind of have to think he might make a show of running for a while, but I don't know that he would ever be the Republican nominee again. Like, he's just not. It's not 2016 anymore, and I think people do, even among Republicans, they figured out something, I think, and I think they'll probably run DeSantis. DeSantis will probably get there, and there are people who are clearly trying to set that up. So that stunt that DeSantis ran, where he sent a number of Venezuelan immigrants to Martha's Vineyard, which is a kind of wealthy person's holiday spot on the East Coast, where a lot of wealthy, powerful people, many of whom are seen as liberals, by Republicans, live, and it was obviously this kind of trolling exercise, right? But it's exactly hitting the sentiments that Trump hits, whenever he talks. But also, it was a much more sophisticated thing than Trump would ever have thought to do, right? To sort of arrange this media circus around owning the libs by chartering a plane and sending these people and DeSantis also sent along, a film crew apparently to capture the impact of this. So yeah, I'm not worried about Trump winning an election. I kind of think he's done, but his movement isn't, and the Republican Party are still beholden to that movement to the extent that, I think they're going to run this candidate basically because if they don't run someone sufficiently Trumpy, well, they just have to. I mean, that's what their voters are clearly going to demand. So, I guess that's the way I see it. I don't have a crystal ball, obviously, and I could be wrong, but
we'll be playing that audio and Trump will run again.
Well, put it this way. It looks to me, and perhaps you agree, it looks to me like that's what people are trying to put together. And I also think that Trump is now kind of damaged in a way that he never was from 2015 on. This stuff about the documents at Mar-a-Lago, that's weird. Him being on Truth Social now, even his supporters, I think there's a kind of weakness there that has never been there before. He's kind of starting to seem a bit shrill. I just have a vibe. And I think it's obvious that DeSantis is getting ready to run and that there are people in conservative media, especially, who are supportive of that. And that's probably all that matters right now.
Well, I think that, Trump might not have had the nous to pull a stunt like that, but I also think Trump probably would have an advisor who could tell him, don't film your kidnappings.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that was, DeSantis might have made the judgment that who cares? I mean, he's not going to get dragged into court in Texas. That just wouldn't have entered into his mind. And that's the other thing that Trump has really unleashed, which is just this kind of, by just sort of mocking and destroying every convention, as empty as liberal conventions may be. He has encouraged this attitude of total impunity, throughout his movement and throughout the Republican Party. If there isn't an actual literal law saying you can't do something, and even if there is, just call their bluff. It'll probably be fine. And I'm sure this will be. I don't think DeSantis personally is going to face a single consequence for this allegation of kidnapping. But yeah, I just don't think Trump wouldn't be able to put something like that together. And, you might say he never needed to, because he could just have a rally and say a bunch of stuff and get on the news anyway, right? But that's DeSantis trying to become a national figure for sure.
Jason, what do you make of Kanye's chances, and what do you make of his recent media performances?
I mean, I don't know what to say about that guy. I think throughout my life, in my memory, there have always been figures in popular culture who just, figure out that controversy works for them, and they just cynically hammer that over and over again, right? I don't know, maybe Madonna in an earlier decade or whatever. There's tons of examples, right? People who just figure out that, if I say something controversial, there's kind of no such thing as bad publicity for me. It just all, augments my existing fame and draws attention to whatever I'm trying to sell right now. But I think there's a complication with Kanye. I think he's trying to do that, but I also think that he has some very public issues. I mean, I think that sort of anti-Semitism is unfortunately something that happens in particular communities of African Americans. I mean, the Nation of Islam is one example there. But obviously, by no means do they have a monopoly on it. I mean, anti-Semitism is basically hot on the heels of any conspiracy theory that anyone of any cultural or racial group might fixate on, right? But his particular articulation of it, I think, is a kind of garbled version of maybe some ideas adjacent to the Nation of Islam. I'm not sure, but it's
I
not
think garbled is sort of generous.
It's not his own creation. Like that chain of associations is not Kanye West's creation. Is all I'm trying to say. Like he's drawing on something existing, but he's drawing it on a way that seems like to me like someone who is not doing so well and someone who has run out of ways to leverage controversy into attention, right? I mean, I just sort of, it's a bit sad, really. It's obviously, in saying that, I'm not, in no way apologizing for the obvious anti-Semitism, which also, people on the right tried to bail him out on, people were saying somehow that wasn't anti-Semitism or that, the left just can't tolerate independent thinkers or whatever, right?
They sort of went on a journey because I think he'd said something like just before he got into the anti-Semitic stuff, and so he was sort of briefly became a cause celeb for people like Tucker Carlson. Right. Then he drops this stuff, and they can't get away from it fast enough. But then there are other people on the right who are like, "This is our opportunity." But then you also have the thing where it's like part of his idea is that there's this Jewish cabal that is supporting Drake, and so it's like, what can you do with that?
Yeah, it's and the stuff about like how black people are really Jewish and stuff. Like it's very it's the kind of thing that you could probably get by mail order back before the internet. Like it's got that like dusty sort of whiff of some kind of like Christian identity, some British Israelist guy or whatever. Like it's very strange stuff, and it's not like just a normal unreflexive bad take, right? It's like there's inverted commas research right behind that. So I just doubt that he's like on the evidence of those tweets. It's not like just simple baiting and trolling. It's to me it looks like evidence of some kind of mental health issue, which he's known to have experienced in the past, and I think that it's one of those situations where it's really unfortunate that it needs to be addressed. I think it does because he's already so prominent, but it's also reinforcing that somewhat by giving him what he wants in terms of he did get a lot of attention. A lot of people noticed Kanye said something. And I don't know, like it's unfortunate that what seems to be a drama that is at least in part a kind of a drama about individual problems, right? Like someone's individual concrete issues has played into everything else we've been talking about up until now, right? I mean, that he's been now adopted as this kind of MAGA celebrity in a way that causes so much whiplash that a couple of days later you've got Republicans, minimizing anti-Semitism publicly. I mean, what do you even say about that? Like, it's just another artifact of not my favorite period in human history.
Just returning to the speech, if I might offer a dissenting opinion to Andy Vote Blue No Matter Who Fleming, and I thought the first bit of the speech was good, but then the second half was sort of just pure nationalism, and he seemed to present this vision of the American dream being realized through infrastructure and a very wishy-washy promise of doing something about the climate. And I'm not sure that building roads and sorting your recycling is going to address things like the corporate capture of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, there was a whole discussion on the left that I kind of partly tuned into after the infrastructure bill with all the climate stuff. And obviously there were people saying, this is a climate emergency, this doesn't go far enough, this is too much of a compromise with fossil fuel interests. And there were others who, in a considered way, at least the examples I saw, said we're saying, if what you want to do on the left is influence policy at the national level, the vehicle for doing that is the Democratic Party. They've just passed a whole bunch of stuff, some of which is pretty good, and you guys don't know how to kind of claim your victories, basically. My expectations of American politics in general have been perhaps clobbered so hard and are now pretty low that I saw some merit in that second point of view. Like, and for the same reason, I saw some merit in Biden's speech. It's like, well, he just said that a big chunk of the Republican Party were fascists, basically, right? Like that's something. But yeah, I mean, in general, like, I can't disagree with you, Cam, that like there weren't really any solutions on offer, right? Except we need to return to our historic values and, yeah, readopt civic nationalism, the American civic religion, and just be better, right? And yeah, some stuff about infrastructure. Like, we're going to have some jobs for you all. And, even if he really kind of believes that he wants to do that, and I just don't know how the existing political system allows him to do much of that. Like, he would need to do something radical. I mean, I think like packing the court was something that radical and up. You know what I mean? Like, for a start, you should pack the court so that the court doesn't just dismantle the administrative state, right? Like, the court doesn't just hamstring it so much that, and there are going to be fights over that sort of thing, for sure. There is a body of opinion on the Supreme Court that says that, like, you can't just delegate authority, to, say, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. Congress can't just say, well, go and basically, to simplify, in law, Congress basically says, go regulate harmful chemicals, and kind of leaves the determination of what chemicals are harmful in what proportion to this agency, presumably staffed by experts, and then they go ahead and enforce that. There's a body of opinion on the Supreme Court that says Congress should have to legislate in detail, on which chemicals are banned, right? Because giving that authority to a public agency is unconstitutional, right? And that's going to be, there are already cases before the court on that kind of issue. That's going to be a huge fight. And with the Supreme Court in the shape that it's in, probably there are going to be losses, in that fight for people who think that government should function tolerably well. So, and there's no other way to address that, unless 3 or 4 people suddenly die. Even then, you might be unlucky. But if 3 or 4 people suddenly die and you've got Congress and you've got the capacity to appoint someone, in time, that's the only other way to change that dynamic, right? And they weren't prepared to do that because there are a couple of Democrats who weren't prepared to do that in the Senate. Yeah, there's no real solutions like that are specific or radical enough to kind of push back on, the broad dynamics of what's happening. What should he do? I mean, I don't. The other problem is, I'm complaining about elected officials not fixing it, but I don't know. Is it the kind of problem that they can solve? I mean, some of the solution could be informed by policy. I think there's like media policy in particular that could be made, which would somewhat hobble the capacity of these folks to propagandize so effectively. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying I have an ideal solution. I just didn't necessarily hear one in that speech. So yeah, I think, yes, you win, Cam.
Perhaps just finally, Jason, your old friend Nick Adams, the alpha male, has been just going off on Twitter. Is he always getting numbers like this?
I don't believe so. I mean, I think this is the best thing that's ever happened to him because, I wrote about him like 7 years ago. He had not long moved over here at that point.
Just for our listeners who haven't heard of Nick Adams, perhaps could you tell us about why he is big now and then maybe remind us about who he used to be?
Well, he's big now because he has been trying for years and years and years to establish himself on the kind of right-wing circuit, right? Like to be speaking at conferences on conference panels, to be, invited onto Fox News, to be, on the kind of circuit that these folks are on, which is, potentially quite lucrative. And certainly you'll be famous after a fashion, right? And he's quite shamelessly over that period pivoted from kind of being a Bush type conservative, like a kind of hawkish foreign policy type, combined with, bracing sort of small government economics. And the Christianity thing has always been a big part of his shtick, right? And that's still there. But now his whole thing is not only much more Trumpy, but it's kind of this sort of boneheaded, dial up to 10 kind of bro MRA type thing, right? Like a kind of, in its more serious moments, maybe such as there are any, it's kind of talking about the restoration of the patriarchal family, right? But mostly it's expressed in these like dunderheaded slogans, right, that he tweets out. And obviously some folks on the left started noticing him, and yeah, he's getting dunked on and retweeted and dunked on by, thousands and thousands of people. The trouble with that is that kind of is good for him in some ways because it raises his profile. Like, he doesn't care if you think he's an idiot. Like, what he cares about is evidence for his potential employers and clients that the left really hates him. Like, lefties really, lefties are so triggered by this guy. We need to get him on Laura Ingraham or whatever, right? Like, but it's quite shameless. Like, he's just sort of doctored his shtick in keeping with, I guess the passage, in keeping with what's happened to the Republican Party over the last 7 years. Now, he started in politics as a young liberal. And in Australia, he was prominent for two things. He was briefly on Ashfield Municipal Council in Sydney. And his big idea there was to kill all the pigeons. and like he made this speech in front of the council where he said, like, I'm not an expert. I'm not a wildlife expert. I don't know how to kill the pigeons, but I just don't want to see them, kind of thing. It was almost this kind of like, yeah, that at that point, he was almost like this weird Western Sydney version of like Joe Bjelke-Peterson or something. Like, it was just kind of like this very stupid populism, I guess. And then, like, he was on Media Watch. Now, I'm not going to remember the details of this, but basically he did some kind of publicity stunt. Hang on. Here's what I said then. He ran into political... he said at the time, Ashfield should be inhospitable to pigeons at a council meeting. Avian influenza does not respect borders. I'm not an expert. I'm not an accountant. I'm certainly not a pest controller. Don't ask me about procedure. What I would like to see is no pigeons in our area. So Ashfield would be the first municipality in the world with no pigeons, I guess. So that's pretty ambitious. He also denounced immigration, multiculturalism, of course, while he was on Ashfield Council, as if that council controls immigration. But then he started trying to launch himself as a motivational speaker, and he stopped turning up at council meetings. And a journalist rang him up to say, what's the story, Nick? And he just launched this tirade of abuse at the journalist, and they got suspended from the Liberal Party. Now, so this is all back, in the early 2010s. He then turned up as a PR guy for something called the Halloween Institute. And I'll quote myself, quote, "This was a fictional front group which organized a protest attended exclusively by paid lingerie models, got a whole lot of free media for a costume hire store, and earned everyone who carried the story a deserved shellacking on Media Watch." So you can, if you want to link readers to this, I've also got a link to the Media Watch episode, which is quite amusing. So this guy's just, it's a defamation territory. I'll let listeners come up with their own word for what this guy was when he was in Australia. But, he gets over there. He gets, I guess, a manager of some kind. He starts making these kind of patriotic sort of, patriotic to America kind of videos. And part of his shtick has always been, I'm an Australian by birth, but I'm an American by choice. This is the greatest country on earth. So, the opposite of what you get from me, basically. And like, he's been toiling away at this for 7 or 8 years. And the reason I wrote about him is because I saw him speak at a conference called the Western Conservative Summit, which is like a Christian right conference that happens in Denver, Colorado every year. It's pretty big. And like when I was there, it was like basically all of the 2016 Republican presidential hopefuls spoke there, except for Trump. But like, actually, I don't think Jeb Bush was there either. But, that doctor, Seventh-day Adventist guy, I've forgotten his name, the neurosurgeon. Anyway, he was there. All the presidential hopefuls were there, except I guess, for the people who were already the front runners. And yeah, this guy spoke. And he spoke on a panel, which is like training wheels, I guess, in this thing. Like he did get his own podium. But he spoke with Raheem Kassam, who at that point was editor-in-chief of Breitbart London and is now, works for Steve Bannon basically and has a website called The National File, pretends to be an investigative journalist. And then he also worked for Nigel Farage. And then there was some other guy, Ben Harris-Quinney from the Bow Group, which is like a, ultra libertarian, like small government kind of, that kind of right-wing think tank in the UK. Yeah. And so, I didn't really think about him again. Like he popped his head up previously for some reason, because I remember retweeting my story again, maybe last year sometime. But now, yeah, he's all over Twitter because of these absurd sort of masculinist tweets he's putting out there, right? And I mean, I don't know. The idea of this guy kind of setting himself up as some kind of paragon of masculinity is, I think, part of what people are finding funny. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
but,
I think, not to get too personal, but there's a disconnect.
Yeah, indeed. So it's just another symptom, I think, of like the fact that this guy could get paid money, for people, because people want to hear him speak. He told Ashfield Council that they should execute all their pigeons. He did it like a fake news, like publicity stunt for Halloween. Like, I don't know. If he had stayed in Australia, I would like to think that he would not be on television or speaking at conferences, right? He'd be like, I don't know. I don't know what he'd be doing. Something in sales, I imagine. But
I wonder if he's laid out a roadmap that outgoing MP Tim Smith, who wanted to kill all the bats to fix coronavirus, could follow.
I mean, look, anyone who is completely shameless, and is just prepared to say or do literally anything, has a shake. Does that fit Tim Smith? I'm not that familiar with his work. I think he probably had his moment in the spotlight after I left the country. But like, if Tim Smith can do that, he should have a go, because the streets are paved with gold, obviously.
Well, Jason, if you have a go, you'll get a go.
There we go. A positive note to end on for a change.
Yeah.
Well, Jason, thanks for joining us. People can, of course, follow you on Twitter at Jason_A_W, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, awesome. Cheers, guys. See you later.
Well, that's our show. We'll catch you next week. Bye-bye.
See you then.
Keeping an eye out, tell me why they violate rights. Blue red lights, little comforts on the street at night. Where did my liberty go? Where did my liberty go? Now they're taking over and they've got complete control. Where did my liberty go? Poverty's high, belly and by. They want you to suffer before you die. There's no moving up, too many mouths to feed. Take all they want from the one too near. Where did my liberty go? Where did my liberty go? Now they're taking over and they've got complete control. Where did my liberty go? Better quiet down, don't speak your mind. Nod your head like everything's fine. Don't verbalize it, cause if they hear you cry, you die, disappear. Where did my liberty go? Where did my liberty go? They took it away, they got complete control.
Throughout October, VACA is hosting a series of rainbow yarning workshops for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. The workshops will include guest speakers presenting on a range of topics for LGBTIQA+ communities and support services. To take part, visit the Victorian Aboriginal Childcare Agency's Facebook page to register. The Victorian Aboriginal Childcare Agency is a 3CR supporter.